Good afternoon and welcome to Lunchtime Series with Kevin, where we add value to people's lives, happening every day at 12 on ebizradio.com. Back again for some really good conversation. We've got, joining me at the coaching segment, we have the CEO of CCI Professionals, Dr. Marcel Hattingh. Dr. Marcel, how are you?
Kevin, good afternoon, and the listeners also doing very well. It seems that the tide is turning slowly, but markets are looking better, and our engagement within the marketplace also seems better than compared to a month or two ago. So overall, doing well. Thank you so much.
Yeah, fantastic. I to that point, I think even to the point we're discussing today, we've seen that even after 12 months, we are capable of quite a lot.
Yes.
And we are really agile in our approach. But don't you want to just give us, before we kick off today's conversation, give us a bit of a summary of where we left off, and because we had three major points that we chatted about, and today we're going to hash that out a little bit and define it a little bit more. But give the listeners something to sort of to where we started.
Wonderful. So once again, thank you for inviting me back also to this specific time slot. So our conversation started off about a month ago, looking at three major changes or three very hot topics of discussion that within my domain as a human capital consultant and also working within your more executive leadership environment seems to be coming to the forefront the whole time. The first one was all about organizational sustainability. A lot of people thought their organizations was kind of invincible, or things were just going well, we are stable. And all of a sudden, due to the pandemic, but also larger challenges like Industry 4 and the changes that we are seeing around the globe, put them back in a position of survival. People are just trying to make ends meet, getting out of that survival space back into a sustainable place and moving forward. So that's the first topic that we delve into a little bit. And somewhere in the future, again, I hope we will have time to elaborate a little bit more. The second conversation is specifically dealing with the idea of human capital investment within this new Industry 4, or then the fourth industrial revolution environment. So what are the changes to the rules of the game? For the last 60, 70 years, we became very accustomed to thinking in terms of Industry 3, when we looked at our people, and now there's new hybrid models. There's all of these online integration. We have very cool artificial intelligence apps and the Internet of Things. And sometimes we overlook that the implication on the human, the individual, is quite challenging and sometimes quite turbulent, how to deal with all of these changes. And this is not only true for us as professionals, but also our younger people, right through to our own families. And how do we consider this in the changing world? And then the final topic, and that's also then the main topic for today, is how do we deal with this on a personal level? Personal resilience, emotional agility, neurological health, mental health. There are so many challenges that we are facing in this time of a perfect storm. And we need to make sure that we as leaders stay healthy and engaged. And then obviously when we start modeling that and we start building environments and shaping workplace environments, that the rest of our teams will also fall into line and follow those healthy patterns. So, Kevin, that's in a nutshell the three topics that we touched on in our previous engagement. And then today, starting almost from the personal side, working backwards in the next season towards that sustainable outcomes of the organization.
So in terms of this, and thanks for summing that up, but, one of the obvious points to me is like, why not start with leadership? Why not start with what people are doing? Why start with personal resilience? Why start there?
Let me tell you a little story. So I don't have all the facts of the story, but my eldest cousin used to be in the special forces of the South African Army. I think they call it the Rekkies or something. And he was a little squad leader, or whatever the technical name was. I missed military days by a couple of years, so excuse me for the ignorance sometimes towards this. But he was stationed in those days, Southwest Africa, and then they had these top secret or incursion missions into the neighboring countries. And at one specific family occasion, he told me a little bit about what happened in those days. And he said, Marcel, basically it worked as follows. Even as the team leader, I didn't know when we were going to be called up for one of these little missions. I would usually be alerted to this about 8 to 10 hours before the actual mission would take place. And usually the way we were called is bring your troopers, bring your team, and come and in for your evaluations. And they would do a series of quick evaluation. They're like a quick fitness test or a mental test and a psychological test and a quick health test to make sure that every one of these special forces team members was in the absolute best shape. The reason for that, if one player was out of shape, they could potentially cost the lives of the entire special forces team. If the sniper didn't do what the sniper is supposed to do, the medic wasn't doing what he's supposed to do, or the telecommunication guys, or the guy, whoever, every person's role and function was critical. And I love the idea of how they considered arguably the best kind of team that you will ever find. I mean, if you look towards, the American SEALs and these kind of guys, I don't think there's any organizational team that can really function as effective as these special forces military teams. But it's the principles that really hold true for me. You see, in our spaces, if we want to function effectively in teams, in groups, in organization, for me, first and foremost, it starts with the individual. If our team is filled with people who are disengaged, they don't have satisfaction in their jobs, their own resilient tanks are run out, their emotional space is completely cluttered up. When we bring these individuals together and we expect a top-notch, sustainable kind of performance, it's just not going to be there. So for us, when we start working with individuals and we want to get to the high-level things like, performance mastery and all of that, for us, it starts with how's things going with the individual? How's things going with their resilience? Because healthy individuals create healthy organizations. If the individuals are dislocated and tired out and struggle to engage with their work outcomes, that's going to be the reflection of the entire organization. There's a direct correlation between them.
Yeah, and I think that's why it's a good entry point, because I think it really leads itself to a mental health conversation, right?
Yes.
And some of what we're going to be touching on today really relates back to how is the mental health really, how are we doing, and how are we, for example, like how does stress impact our own resilience, and what do I need to pay attention to? Because I think a lot of people, I have found myself in a position where you're going through stress, maybe a bit of anxiety, and because it becomes usual, we don't even realize that we're functioning at optimal the whole time, and you kind of, then suddenly you have to take three weeks of work because you can't cope anymore. So
so true.
So how does stress really affect us, and how does it relate back to a bit of resilience?
Kevin, I have appreciation that you use the word stress, because stress is most probably the unifying factor. I mean, we can talk about crises, negativity, disappointment, setbacks. There's many negative words to describe the reality that you can experience in the workplace, but stress is really the unifying factor. So obviously, I can't go into too much detail here today, but you touched on the neurological side, the mental side. So when the body is under stress, there is a hormone, and I'm only going to list this one most probably today, known as cortisol. We also call that the stress hormone. It's released in a specific area in the brain, the amygdala. And when you have a high stress incident, like you're in a car accident, or there was a mugging, or you got the bottom line results for the quarter or the monthly report and it's just not there, you have that high incident and the body releases high levels of cortisol. But then again, also, if you're in a stressful environment over a prolonged duration of time, the stress levels and the cortisol levels keeps on increasing. Now, it doesn't matter whether you're old or young or male or female or any other demographic. This is one of the universal realities of being a human being. Cortisol is the result of that stress. Now, if we don't have cortisol in our bodies, if we don't have stress, it is also an unhealthy place to be. There's a very old model by Hirkens Dodson that was developed many years ago that it's kind of a bell curve, if you want to look at this, to say there's an optimal position in the middle where we grow and develop. But if we go down the left slide of the slope, it's almost a place where you will fall into boredom. Kevin, I'm sure you've never experienced this, but some people say they take 2 to 3 weeks of holiday over December, and then after 2 weeks, they sit around feeling bored in life. There's not enough challenge. I need to do something constructive again. That's when there's so little stress, and that in itself is unhealthy for the body. I mean, you and I go to the gym, and I put on my running shoes, and intentionally, I put stress on my body. I pick up a dumbbell, and I do a bicep curl to put stress on the body, because that kind of manageable and controllable stress is healthy also for my resilience. I do need that. The problem is if you go down the opposite side of the bell curve, and that stress is either too high or too prolonged, and then we start moving to this place which they call a workplace burnout or a professional burnout, on which we will touch a little bit later on. So we need stress in our lives. It's healthy for us. It builds the resilience, but we need to have control over it and have it in manageable quantities in our body.
So fair to assume that stress, I follow a neuroscientist as well, Dr. Huberman, who I don't know if you know Andrew Huberman, but he speaks a lot about neuroscience and something I'm very passionate about, but also he also speaks about why stress is your indicator. It's an indicator of something happening. And I think people have that misperceived notion that stress is just bad.
Yeah.
It's just that we just have bad stress. But stress in itself is a good indicator on action, right? On taking action.
It is.
And I think people have that tying back to resilience. I think people have that miscommunicated idea about what stress really is.
Yeah. So let's talk about this concept of resilience just for a moment to make sure all of our listeners are, I think, familiar with what we mean by the concept of resilience. I know in my own home language of Afrikaans, if you try and translate the word resilience, there's a bit of a lack of good translative words for that. We rather describe the concept than having one specific concept that everybody understands.
Yeah.
But for me, to give you a metaphor, if you pick up a 5 Rand coin, I like to explain resilience from this point of view, that there's two sides to this coin. It's the same thing, but there's two elements. The one side we like to call the endurance side. Resilience deals a lot with your ability to continue. It deals a lot with the way you push through challenging situations. How do you keep the focus? How do you keep the endeavors going? Many years ago, there was this movie by Sylvester Stallone, the Rocky Balboa movies. I think there was like 270. No, I'm just joking. There were many of these movies, but in one of them, there's this scene where Rocky and his eldest son, who's now an adult, have a showdown. Rocky wants to get back into the boxing ring. He used to be the ex-world boxing champion, and his son is having a go at him. And unfortunately, his son is having a bit of a pathetic position, not really engaging in life and the challenges. But then Rocky tells him an interesting thing. He said, you need to understand that nobody will hit as hard as life itself. It's these curveballs, these unintended things. But then he makes the statement, it's not how hard you can hit. It's how many hits can you take and keep on moving forward. That's how winners are made. You see, that for me is the one side of the resilience coin, the endurance side. It's not how hard can I actually hit back in life. It's how many hits can I take and keep on moving forward. But to stick with a boxing example, Kevin, there's a space and a time when we need to get out of the boxing ring. As a young amateur boxing, well, I was more in the world of MMA fighting, you can get into the ring and you can size up an opponent. There's chances I'm going to win. There's chances I'm going to get, beaten a little bit. But if a guy like Mike Tyson, who used to be the world heavyweight champion, gets in the other side of the ring, that's a time when my endurance say, Marcel, you need to get out. You need to have the wisdom to know, when is this thing going to hurt you? When is this thing going to damage you? There's times when we need to close businesses. There's times when we need to cut our losses. There's times when we need to get out, because you're going to get seriously and permanently damaged if you get into the ring with Mike Tyson. Resilience is as much an endurance to keep on going as it is a wisdom to know when to get out of the ring. That's the one side of the coin. Now, Kevin, if we turn that coin around, the other side of that coin is what we call our bounce back ability. This is your flexibility. This is your agility. Because in boxing, as with many sparring kind of sports, one of the first psychological things they train you is to say that you need to make peace with the fact one day you will get knocked down. It's an inevitable fact, because there will be a sneak punch, there will be a low blow, there will be a shot which you did not seek out. Make peace with that. If you think you're going to be this typical movie hero, the Arnold Schwarzenegger, Jean-Claude Van Damme kind of 80s action movies where you never fall down, forget about it. You will be knocked down. That's not the issue. The issue is the 10 count. When you get knocked down, do you have the ability to get up? Do you have that bounce back ability in your step? Or the moment when you get knocked down, you get so, dismotivated, disengaged, distorted in your view that you get counted out. Resilience is as much with that bounce back ability as it is with the ability to keep on enduring. And that's my mental picture in any case, two sides of the coin of what we mean by having healthy resilience. Kevin, is this making sense? I'm trying to put it into narrative format also, that our listeners can get some good handles on the concept.
Absolutely. I love the analogy of two sides of the coin. Even from an agility perspective, one of the NLP presuppositions that we live by is the law of requisite variety, which is, the person with the most agility and option and choice of behavior gets to rules that, his system. And when you consider that, you kind of go, well, how rigid am I? And how inflexible am I? And is it really helping? Because it's definitely going to lead to a bit of resilience failure, right? Yeah. But tell us, in terms of resilience failure, what are the signs? Like, how do we know that we're not coping? We're not actually getting there.
Yeah. So let me recommend a read, and I'll recommend it because the author is a close associate and friend of ours, Mr. Paul Donders. He's the CEO of Expand International. They're a Northern European consulting house. So Paul has been training with us for most probably the last 10 years in South Africa quite often, though he stays in the Netherlands. Paul wrote a book on this topic called Personal Resilience. It's available on Amazon in Kindle format also. Really recommendable read because it's so practical. Now, Paul describes resilience in this book as a curve through which we move. And I'll try and unpack the curve quickly, because the curve helps us to understand different stages, but also, as you asked, the different indicators. So if your stress levels becomes out of the ordinary, either prolonged or high incident, we start moving down this burnout curve or this slope, and we get to a strained place before we get to a place where we finally end off in burnout. Now, that strained place is also called a stage of hyperactivity. The reason for hyperactivity, and that's our first indicator, is that the cortisol is a precursor to what we call an adrenaline rush. Now, a lot of people get quite addicted to adrenaline rush. We do all these weird kind of sports and things. But the matter of fact is, adrenaline is cool stuff. I mean, if you've ever been on a good adrenaline rush, it makes you faster, stronger, you think more clear and all of that. And really, our bodies were created to function with that super kind of hormone endorphin that pumps through the body. Yeah. I don't know if you've ever had the privilege of driving or being in a car that had nitro in the engine. Many years ago, I had the privilege here in Johannesburg at Kailami, our racetrack, to be in a car which had a nitro injection. It was an unbelievable thrill. But the question is, so why don't we just drive our cars off this nitro? And the pure, simple reason, because you're going to burn out the engine. You see, that's the problem with hyperactivity. If I walked in the bushveld, and I'm going hunting again next weekend, and the lion crosses paths with me, my body releases this enormous amount of adrenaline to give me the best chances of surviving the lion attack. Now, I don't know how effective that is, if ever you ran into a lion in the wild, but that's in any case how the body was structured. But the idea is, within a day or two, my body has metabolized all the cortisol and the adrenaline, and the rush is out. And then I return to a normal state. Now, here's a very interesting fact, which you reference in the NLP world, also in the neurosciences. From a neuroscientific point of view, we know that the body can't differentiate between a physical aggression and an emotional aggression. Guys like Dr. David Rock and the Neuro Leadership Institute guys have done a lot of research in this field that whether it's the lion or whether it's the perceived danger within the workplace, my body is going to respond in the same way. So I go into the state of hyperactivity and I feel I can get the goals done. However, a healthy, mature adult can most probably only sustain that for about 3, 4, 5, perhaps 6 weeks before the body starts saying, time out, time out. This is unhealthy. This is like running the engine off the adrenaline. And then there are next stages, and I'll get to that in a moment. So hyperactivity, great fun, lots of things that we do. That's why we write examinations in a state of hyperactivity. That's why we do a lot in project management, but it's not a sustainable position. And that's the first red light. If you start seeing the signs of hyperactivity, you need to make sure that you do this in measurable quantities. Kevin, is that making sense?
Absolutely, yeah. And, it just leads me to, you also mentioned the amygdala and how the cortisol affects the brain. And essentially this is happening, at lightning speed.
Yes.
But also that I think what we don't always realize is when we keep ourselves in a high stressed environment and constantly, part of your brain also starts functioning differently. We don't necessarily become more engaged, we become more disengaged based on the fact that I'm stressed, I'm constantly in this environment, and slowly but surely I'm depleting my ability to have literal brain power.
Yeah. And I think this is what the burnout curve that Paul Donders described shows so nicely, because it's an upward trajectory with your hyperactivity. So you actually start performing at levels of 120, 130, 140%. Then overnight, your body suddenly realizes, listen, this is dangerous and damaging and you're not taking control. And then suddenly that slope starts falling down. And that's why we call it a burnout curve. It's like an avalanche. And the first red light, now this is not an indicator, this is already a red light screaming at us, is what we call a state of mental confusion. The body suddenly stops producing that adrenaline and high levels of cortisol. And suddenly you drop from about 120, 130% performance back to 100%, and you start tiring out very quickly. It's like you wake up one morning, felt great the previous night, and then all of a sudden you feel a little bit confused. What is my priorities again? Where should I start doing this work of mine? It happens in the middle of the day, or Kevin, if I confess my sins here, just during the last couple of weeks at the pace that we're going, at a local shopping mall where I spend a lot of time in meetings in a coffee shop, I walked into the parking lot, not twice, but 3 times in a matter of 2 weeks, and I forgot where I parked my car. And that's a clear indicator, because I'm very mindful of my surroundings, that, Marcel, you are not mindful of what's going on. I'm in that state of confusion. I need to step out. I need to take a breather. So that state of confusion is the first real indicator that we've been pushing too hard, too far, and we're going down the slope. Kevin, is that making sense?
Absolutely. I love it. Yes. So in terms of becoming more resilient, because, I think, we need to have that built-in awareness around how do we do this? How do I start paying attention to my own emotional state, my own confusion, I'm starting to notice that things are not like they usually are, and I'm not feeling on top of the world. I'm tired. And how do I become more resilient?
Yeah. So, Kevin, this is a very, very important, and I'll get to some of the practical points in a couple of minutes from now. But you see, as long as I am mindful in the state of hyperactivity or the state of confusion, that it is my responsibility. I feel a little bit stupid. I feel a little bit strange. I know I should be knowing my priorities and all of that. As long as we are there, it's a very manageable thing still. And I'll get to that in a moment. The problem is if we don't address that state, we start moving even further down that burnout curve. And that's to the states of what we call frustration, ultimately despair. And it's the despair space where we say, now you are medically in a position of burnout. But you see, the difference between the confusion and the frustration is the fact that people abdicate their responsibility of taking care of their own resilience. Because sooner or later, I come to this conclusion that, hey, hang on a minute, this can't be me. I can't be the author of my own demise. I can't be the author of my own challenges, somebody or something must be blamed. The boss, the work, the market, the government. And Kevin, that's the danger zone. The moment that you start blaming other people, and look, I'm not talking about the colleague that's not doing their work and should be disciplined and, there should be appropriate consequence. I'm talking about the fact that I'm getting so confused with my own workload, my own emotional capacity, whether it's personal or professional, that I'm starting to blame the blame game. And that's where the real danger is. That's where we need perspective. You need a coach. You need even professional assistance if we start falling behind or below that health line. Because that's where coping mechanisms and ultimately escapisms starts entering into. People can't deal with the reality. It must be blamed on somebody else. So I need a coping mechanism. I overeat or undereat, overtrain or under-exercise. I stop doing basic routines in life. I start spending credit cards. And ultimately, even the escapism, this is where I look towards the alcohol cabinet and the sleeping tablets and become violent and aggressive. This is where moral failures start entering turn. Obviously, the ultimate escapism, and we're seeing when we're looking at the research of ICAS and some of our psychology houses, suicide. That's the ultimate mechanism of escaping. And these things are increasing significantly at this point in time. And not even with senior professional people, we're seeing it even with younger people at school level and the challenges they're facing. So as long as we are not down in a level where we've abdicated the responsibility, because at that stage we need support, yes, through your mindfulness, there's some practical things that we can talk about. What can I do? But I just want to make sure, Kevin, is this making sense if we take the entire burnout curve into consideration before we get to those final stages of despair?
Yeah, absolutely. Because and sort of what I'm loving about this is I think people are not always aware of getting to that burnout stage.
Yep.
But the way that you're sort of leading us there really starts showing us that there's a pre-awareness and there's a preventative measure that I can start actively being involved with.
Yes.
Before I get to just the despair, right?
Yeah. So, Kevin, this is where I have a lot of, I don't want to call them arguments, but this is where I run into challenges in a lot of executive coaching. An executive team member would tell me, I've got some team members and it seems they are burned out. But I can't, for the heck of it, understand why, because their job description and their workload and their complexity, and they use all these fancy terms, is so much less than mine. Why am I coping and why are they not coping? And then I need to explain them in a very polite way. Sir, ma'am, resilience is not a workplace aspect. Resilience is a neurological function. It's a function of emotional capacity, if we want to use another word for that. I can go into work and juggle 50 professional balls. Then I get back home only to find out that they've broken into my house. My son took the car without notifying me, and he was in a car crash. And there are some challenges with somebody in my family that got sick. Look, I'm painting a very bleak scenario now. You see, but all of a sudden, all of these major personal stressors puts my brain in this hyper state of stress. Tomorrow morning, when I walk back into work, those 50 balls, I'm going to drop 45 of them because I simply don't have the capacity to carry them. And this is this fallacy of work-life balance. And I'm still hearing it everywhere, as though you can balance your private life, your personal life, with your social life, with your professional life. And Kevin, really, I understand the principle. What we're trying to say by work-life balance is to live a balanced, healthy life. But the brain doesn't understand that. The brain only understands the concept of integration. I have one brain. I have one set of stressors. I have one dose or amount of cortisol in my body, irrespective of where I get that. If it's a high incident, man, it can take 2, 3, 4 days for that full amount to get out of my body. And that is the key. The bottom line answer to our resilience is the fact that we need to look at our lives holistically, and we need to make sure that the major stressors are under control. And if you can't control them, they're outside of your control. You and I can do nothing about state capture and government corruption and the fourth industrial revolution and the pandemic. However, we can take charge over our mental perception and how we view those things and how we view the impact that they have in our lives. But we must get the stressor or the perspective of the stressor under control.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, that sort of leads us to, you know, the final question for today is, once we understand that we're in this position, how do I actually deal with burnout? Because I don't think, you know, it's not an obvious thing. A lot of the time, people end up on medication because of it.
Yes.
And you know, they don't have practical steps to help.
Yes.
So how do I deal with burnout once I realize, okay, cool, I am in a place of despair. I am functioning at this really stressed out level. And now I don't want to do it anymore. I just want to pack my bags and sleep for 15 days.
Yeah, it's so true. You know, I think it was August 2019 when the World Health Organization also changed the classification or the categorization of workplace burnout to not just be some airy-fairy emotional, sorry, you can't cope with life kind of thing, but they brought it into the medical domain to say, hang on, guys, there is much more real-time medical aspects that's associated with this. Yes, the clinical diagnosis of what exactly or when exactly are you in a state of burnout. You need a professional person to diagnose that. But yeah, it's a very, very difficult position. The research shows that if you're under the age of 40, it will most probably take you a year or two to fully recover if you've been in official medical burnout. Over the age of 40, so Kevin, sorry for you and me, but it can take up to 5 years if we fully recover. And there is quite a large portion. People estimate 20 to 25% of people who never become fully functional again in the workspace once they've gone through official medical burnout. So rather stay out of it altogether. And I think that's the important space. Long before we get into the place of official burnout, each one of these stages in the burnout curve obviously have a specific way in which we step out, whether it's in the hyperactivity or the confusion, or it's the frustration or the despair, so that we don't get to that place of burnout. But if you're in a state of burnout, 3 quick words of advice, perhaps. The first thing is you're going to need professional intervention. There's no ways around that. Chances that you will be getting through this by yourself is very slim. And the only reason for that is you got yourself into that mess in the first place, but now you've lost your capacity to realistically think about what's going on in reality. So please find yourself a trusted professional person. The second aspect, you'll most probably need medication for a short while. Look, I'm very pro the medical world. I come from a background in that field, but the medication is not the answer. It's not going to change your world. The medication is only going to take the edge off in order that you can start seeing reality again for what it is. And obviously, you need to go and see either a good medical doctor or then a psychiatrist that can prescribe the right kind of medication. And not necessarily the heavy antidepressants. And I know there's a lot of negative stigma, except when the coping mechanism and the escapism has already caused a lot of damage. Then we might need some additional, really stronger medication, but something just to take the edge off. That is the second thing. The third thing is, it all boils down to the fact that you need to step out of the reality of whatever is causing that stress. All the medication, all the professional help, it boils down to the fact you need to step out. In a state of hyperactivity, you need to step out. In confusion, step out. Frustration, step out. Kevin, in my life, and I'm sure it's similar with yours, I can't take away the states of hyperactivity. It's part of modern day business and modern day society. But I do have control over how often and how regular do I step out. And there are many, many cool little practical things that you and I can do in an ongoing basis to manage that state of hyperactivity for long, long periods, so that I don't feel I need to take this 3-week leave. In any case, the first week you're usually sick because your body crashes down, and then slowly you just start up. 3 weeks later, you've got double as much problems waiting back at home and at work, and you wonder if you should have taken leave in the first place. So Let's rather deal with it in the state of hyperactivity and confusion before we need the medical intervention, the professional intervention at the bottom, because it still boils down to you need to step out of the stressor environment. Stop the cortisol flow.
Fantastic. Dr. Marcel, thank you. This is so useful. And, I think it's a good conversation to have. And, the more we bring attention to it and the more people are aware, I think the more people are actively getting involved with themselves and building a bit of self-awareness. But don't you want to just sort of summarize, today's conversation, give us some tips and tricks on how we can, actively be involved in our own resilience and how to build up that emotional agility?
Yeah. In Paul Donder's book, he writes, he says, personal resilience is a competency and a capacity. Competency, it's in other words, something that you can learn. So once again, this broadcast, you can share this with other people. You can come to a skills workshop where you train people in resilience, whether it's our company or any other company, or you can read the books, watch YouTube clips, but get yourself skilled in resilience. There is a competency. But the second component is the capacity. Now, I've already mentioned I love running long distances, ultra distances. I can get the best Comrades marathon champions in this room, the Bruce Fordyces and those kind of guys. They can teach you all the competencies, but if you don't buy the pair of tackies and get out on the road and start running, the competency itself is not enough. I must build the capacity on the road before I'm going to do a Comrades marathon. So my word of advice on this would be, you're welcome to pop over to our company, both the LinkedIn and the Facebook pages, but also my own personal one. About a year ago, when we started with the hard lockdowns in March of 2020, we did 35 small little slides that has 35 different practical ideas of what you can do to step out. Literally 10, 15 minutes a day. You don't have to do something every day. You can do it every second or third day. So if you go to CCI Professional, either on LinkedIn or CCI Professional on Facebook, and you just page a little bit back through our history and the post that's been made on our social media channels, or just my own personal pages also of Marcel Hattingh. Those 35 slides, you will very quickly see them. They're in a whole series there, and it's a lot of practical things. For instance, how do I get my life in order? How do I take up a hobby? How do I take up sport? How do I share some gratitude or appreciation? There are things like arts and crafts, doing pottery. That's not going to work for me, but it might be working for you. Things like spirituality, worship, prayer, meditation, that has huge effect. Getting your affairs in order, taking care of that testament again of yours, making sure that your trust fund is sorted out, making sure that, things that you want to study in life, what are those bucket list items? I mean, there's really some good practical stuff that you can look on those slideshows. And if we get into a habit of regularly doing these things, it's going to help us to significantly move forward in just staying healthy in those states of hyperactivity.
Amazing. Thank you, Dr. Marcel. That was, so insightful, and I absolutely love that we could share this. I'm assuming that that's exactly why that sort of leads us into our human capital conversation, which is going to be happening next time.
Yes.
And that's why it ties so well into that. Guys, but if you want to find out more about this, all of the information will be in the description boxes below. And that's the Chief Executive Officer of CCI Professional, Dr. Marcel Hattingh. Thank you for joining me, and thanks for the time. I will definitely be sharing all the links and the website in the details below. So, but thank you, and look forward to chatting to you next time.
Evan, thank you very much. And to the listeners also, I really appreciate the opportunity.
Fantastic. Thanks, Doc. I'll chat to you soon.
Thanks. Bye now.
Cheers. Bye.